There are winters in northern Minnesota when the cold moves in so deep, you forget what warmth ever felt like. The sky goes slate gray by mid-afternoon, and the world outside the window falls silent. So silent you might think time itself had frozen, buried under a sheet of ice that'll never thaw. Walter Harris had lived through 67 of these winters. He carried them in his bones, felt them settle in every joint. Folks in town called his place the cabin by the broken bridge, but most had stopped talking about him years ago. Out here, beyond the edge of the plowed road, he was little more than a rumor, just a streak of light in a distant window, a figure trudging through the snow, shoulders bent against the wind. But every morning, before the sun could burn through the low clouds, Walter would walk down to the creek. The bridge lay shattered, one side slumped, the wooden span cracked and blackened from years of rot and storms. Ice gripped the creek beneath, the water barely whispering underneath all that weight. It was a bridge that went nowhere, a bridge that refused to heal. Walter stood at the near end, boots leaving deep prints in the crusted snow. He pressed his gloved hand to the rough timber rail, tracing the old scars where bolts had once held the world together. In another life, he'd been famous for bridges, his name on blueprints and plaques, his face in old magazine clippings still tucked in a drawer by the bed. But all those years and all that steel meant nothing now. Not since the day Daniel died. Some mornings he could almost hear his son's voice, laughing as a child, arguing as a teenager, steady and calm on the phone as a grown man. Daniel had been proud, stubborn, brilliant. And then, one spring, the phone call came. Collapse, faulty inspection, lives lost, a father's voice breaking over the static. "I should have checked it myself. God, Daniel, I'm sorry." Walter's world had narrowed to this: a ruined bridge, a silent house, a wound that never closed. Grief, it turns out, is a kind of winter all its own. He knew people whispered about him, said he'd lost his mind, spending his days staring at broken planks, muttering at ghosts. But Walter didn't care. The bridge was the only place where the past felt close enough to touch. Some hurts, he'd learned, don't heal. They just become part of the landscape, like frost-bitten trees or the sag of an old roof under snow. That morning, as he leaned against the rail, he noticed something strange, marks in the snow that hadn't been there yesterday. Not boot prints, not deer, not the neat tracks of a fox. These were round, heavy, spaced far apart. Walter knelt, his knees creaking, and pressed his palm beside one. Big. Too big for a dog. He brushed away the powder, revealing the full shape. Pads, claws, the clear, silent presence of something wild. A bobcat, he thought, feeling a flicker of old caution. He'd seen a few over the years, elusive, sharp-eyed, more shadow than substance. But what would bring one so close, right up to the edge of the broken span? The air was thick with the scent of pine and old smoke, and now, beneath it, the faint iron tang of animal, alive, hungry, curious. For a moment, Walter felt as if he were being watched. He straightened, scanning the far side of the creek, but saw only trees pressed close, their branches heavy with snow. The hush was so complete that his own breath sounded too loud, too human. He remembered stories from his childhood, tales of animals as omens, sometimes warning, sometimes mercy. He wondered which this would be. Turning away, he trudged back up the path, boots dragging, the tracks behind him slowly filling with wind-blown snow. Inside, the cabin was cold, but familiar, battered stove ticking as it warmed, a line of photographs on the mantel. Wedding day, a boy with a gap-toothed grin, a young man holding a fishing rod, laughing at the edge of a river. Walter's world shrunk to frames and memories. He made coffee, black and strong, and sat at the window where he could watch the bridge. Hours passed. The snow deepened. He thought of calling someone, just to hear another voice. But he didn't. What would he say? That a ghost cat was haunting his bridge? That he was still waiting for an apology from the past that would never come? The daylight waned, blue shadows stretching across the ice. Sometimes, as night pressed in, Walter let himself believe that the world could still change. That maybe if he just kept watch long enough, something would give. The bridge would heal. The past would lift. Daniel would come home. But most days, hope was as thin as the frost on the glass, a fragile shimmer, gone at the first breath. Still, Walter found himself standing at the window, cup growing cold in his hands, staring out at that ruined span. If you've ever stood at the edge of something broken, wondering if it could ever be made whole again, maybe you'll understand why he couldn't let go. Maybe you'll see a little of yourself in the quiet stubbornness that kept him coming back, day after day, to a bridge that refused to heal. And as darkness settled and the wind picked up, Walter whispered a promise to no one at all. Tomorrow, he'd check again. He always did, because some bridges, even the broken ones, were all a man had left. Night comes quickly in this part of Minnesota. By 5 o'clock, the woods have swallowed what little light remains, and the world outside Walter's window shrinks down to a faint blue haze and the cold rattle of wind against the eaves. Inside, the only sound is the slow tick of the wall clock and the whisper of steam rising from his mug. Walter sits in silence, letting his mind drift, feeling the hours settle on his shoulders like another layer of snow. But sleep lately is a stranger. He wakes often, sometimes from dreams of falling bridges and frantic voices, sometimes from a silence so complete it feels suffocating. Tonight, it's neither memory nor nightmare that pulls him from bed, but something more primal. A sound so soft he isn't sure he's heard it at all. The creak of old timber, the hush of snow disturbed, a presence close but unseen. Walter pulls on his boots and parka, hands trembling as he fumbles with the zipper. The cold bites at his face the moment he steps outside. Moonlight catches on the ice, throwing pale shadows across the yard. He stands for a long minute, listening, every sense stretched thin. The night is thick with the sharp scent of pine, the bitter tang of wood smoke, the distant cry of something wild. Then he sees it, fresh tracks pressed into the untouched snow, leading straight toward the bridge. He follows them, heart pounding in his chest, the old fear and curiosity stirring together. Each print is wide and deep, toes splayed, claws leaving sharp crescents in the powder. Bobcat, no doubt now. The tracks circle the end of the bridge, pause, then cross to the broken span itself. Walter crouches, the cold seeping through his jeans, and studies the marks. They're fresh, no more than an hour old. The animal must still be near. He glances up, half expecting to see golden eyes glinting in the dark. Nothing. Only the stillness of the woods, the hush of falling snow, the weight of 100 memories pressing in. Walter's breath fogs in the air, mingling with the mist that creeps up from the creek. He thinks of old stories, predators lurking at the edge of firelight, ghosts drawn to places that will not heal. The bridge groans beneath the wind, an old wound refusing to close. The next morning, Walter is up before dawn. He eats in silence, staring at the print of his own palm on the frosted window, and wonders if last night was real or just another trick of the lonely dark. When the sun finally spills across the treetops, he grabs his coat and heads out. The world is washed in silver, every branch glazed with ice. The bobcat's tracks are still there, more of them now, looping back and forth across the bridge supports. Walter kneels again, fingers numb, and traces the outline of each paw. As he moves along the old beams, he sees something else. Deep scratches gouged into the wood. 4 marks in a row, slashing downward with force. Fresh, raw, he runs his thumb over them, the splinters pricking his skin. Not just passing through, he thinks, marking territory, or maybe warning something away. He straightens, scanning the trees, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. For a moment, he feels the wild pressing in, something old and fierce and unafraid. It's been a long time since anything has looked at him that way, since anything has seen him as more than a shadow at a window. There's a strange comfort in it too, to be noticed, to matter, even as prey. Walter shakes his head, trying to laugh at himself, but the sound dies before it leaves his throat. Bobcats aren't gentle, he mutters, as if the animal might be listening. You keep your distance, I'll keep mine. But deep down, he isn't sure what he's warning, the bobcat or himself. The day stretches on. Walter busies himself with chores, stacking wood, shoveling the walk, but his mind keeps wandering back to the bridge. When dusk comes, he finds himself drifting toward it again, drawn by a pull he can't quite name. The prints are still there, and now he sees where they veer off into the brush, disappear, then return again. As if the animal circles the place over and over, unable to leave it behind. He crouches by the scratches, running his hand over the cold wood. It's an old habit, touching the scars of things, feeling out their stories. He wonders if the bobcat knows loss, if it's searching for something out here in the frozen wild, just like he is. The question sits heavy in his chest. Can an animal mourn? Can it haunt the same ground, day after day, unable to move on? He stays there until the sky goes dark, breath coming in slow clouds, the only witness to whatever secret plays out between bridge and wild. Somewhere, a branch snaps. Walter stands, feeling suddenly watched again. He turns, half hoping, half fearing he'll see those eyes gleaming from the brush. But the woods remain silent. Back at the cabin, he lights a lamp and sits with his hands wrapped around his mug, the glow painting golden ovals on the worn wood of the table. He tells himself the bobcat is just an animal, following its instincts, passing through. But when he closes his eyes, he sees those tracks circling the bridge, sees the deep scratches in the wood, feels the old ache in his heart flinch at the thought. Maybe the wild isn't chasing him. Maybe it's something he's carrying with him, his regret, his loss, drawing these ghosts out of the night. He finishes his coffee in silence, listening to the wind scrape the window pane, the hush settling in again. Out there under the broken bridge, paw prints wait in the snow, silent as a question that won't let go. Have you ever felt that? The sense that something out there, something untamed, unseen, knows your pain, circles your wounds, and won't let you be. Or maybe deep down, it's just yourself you're running from, all the old scars waiting to be faced in the cold light of morning. As Walter blows out the lamp and climbs into bed, the last thing he thinks is not of the bridge, or even the bobcat, but of Daniel's voice, lost somewhere between the world of the living and the hush of falling snow. A memory prowling just beyond the edge of sight, refusing to leave him alone. Fog isn't rare in Minnesota. Not when the snow starts to melt from below. The creek sighs with cold water, and the sky presses close, heavy with secrets. But this morning, the mist rolls in thicker than usual, crawling through the trees like something alive, swallowing color, swallowing distance, making every familiar thing strange. Walter stands on the porch, mug cradled in both hands, and stares into the blankness where the world used to be. It's the kind of morning that feels like waiting for something to break, or for something lost to find its way back. Walter sips his coffee, but the warmth barely reaches his bones. The fog dampens every sound, turns the creak of the bridge into a rumor, the cry of a distant crow into nothing at all. Even the cabin seems to shrink, pressed in by the weight of air and memory. He can't stay inside. Not today. Something in the fog calls to him, a pull, gentle but insistent. He wraps his scarf tighter, pulls on his boots, and steps out into the gray. The snow crunches underfoot, muffled and strange. Each breath comes back at him, cold and close, as if the air is reluctant to let go. The path to the bridge is narrower than usual, the trees looming like figures half remembered from a dream. Walter moves slowly, each step a negotiation with age and ache. The world beyond the end of his boots dissolves into a haze, the past and present blending until he can no longer tell one from the other. Some mornings, the pain in his hip is the only thing that feels real. He pauses at the creek, squinting into the fog. The bridge emerges by degrees. A handrail here, a broken plank there. The whole span revealed only when he is nearly upon it. The air is thick with the scent of wet wood and old moss, tinged with something sharp and wild. For a moment he wonders if he's alone. Then he sees them. Two golden eyes, motionless and bright, watching from the far side of the bridge. The bobcat stands poised at the very edge of the broken span, its fur blending with the fog, its gaze fixed and steady. Not stalking, not afraid. Just there, present, unblinking. Walter feels the moment stretch, drawn out and suspended, as if the fog itself holds its breath. His own breath catches, not from fear but something quieter, a kind of awe, a recognition. He doesn't move. The bobcat doesn't move. They watch each other through the fog, two ghosts haunting the same wound in the world. For a heartbeat, Walter feels both judged and forgiven, as if this wild thing can see all the way through to the sorrow he carries, and finds nothing worth running from. It's strange, the things you remember in moments like this. The warmth of a small hand in his. Daniel's laugh echoing off stone as they walked bridges together long ago. The sound of his own voice promising always to be there, to check every bolt and brace. A promise broken by distance, by work, by the slow rot of time and regret. He wants to speak, to say something that might matter, to bridge the gap between now and then, between man and wild. But all that comes is a whisper, lost in the fog. What do you want from me? The bobcat's ears flick, but it doesn't move. The fog curls around its legs, swirling like smoke. Walter glances down, half expecting the animal to vanish when he looks up again. But the bobcat remains, its eyes twin lanterns in the mist. It blinks, slow and deliberate, then lifts one paw, places it gently on the ruined rail. For a moment, it almost seems to nod, as if in agreement with a question Walter hasn't dared to ask aloud. He wonders if the animal is searching for something, someone. He thinks of how loss circles back, how it finds new forms, a bridge left unfinished, a son never coming home, a wild creature drawn again and again to the same broken place. Maybe, he thinks, some wounds call out across species, across lifetimes. Maybe there's comfort in not being alone with your ghosts. A sudden gust stirs the fog, blurring the world to watercolor. When it clears, the bobcat is gone. Walter stands, heart hammering, scanning the far bank, but sees nothing but drifting mist and the dark line of trees. For a moment, he feels foolish, an old man chasing phantoms, reading meaning into the wild. But he can't shake the sense that something important has passed between them, something silent but real. He stays by the bridge, listening to the silence, watching the fog lift in slow, reluctant coils. The sun finally breaks through, turning everything gold for a moment, dazzling and sharp. In that light, he can almost believe in second chances, in wounds that mend, even if they never fully close. Back at the cabin, Walter sits by the window, notebook open, pen poised above a blank page. He writes, "Saw the bobcat again, stared me down like it knew." He hesitates, then adds, "Didn't feel so alone." The words look small on the page, but they weigh more than he'd expected. He looks up, out at the broken bridge, and thinks, maybe this is how it starts. Not with mending timbers, but with standing still in the fog, meeting the wild on its own uncertain ground. Maybe healing is less about fixing what's broken, and more about learning to see what's still alive. However wary, however fleeting, on the other side. That night, Walter falls asleep with the image of golden eyes lingering behind his own, and for the first time in years, his dreams are quiet. Not empty, not without ache, but quieter, as if something restless in him has found a place to sit and watch the fog roll by. Dusk comes early in February, a slow bleeding of light through the tangled woods. The day slips from gray to blue, then vanishes into a cold that bites deeper for how quietly it settles. For Walter Harris, these are the hours that weigh most, when the ache of what's gone lingers, and the old bridge waits beneath a sky thick with the scent of snow and dusk. That evening, Walter stands at the window long after supper, mug untouched, eyes fixed on the dark outline of the broken span. He tells himself he isn't waiting for anything. He tells himself he's simply curious, making sure the wild hasn't claimed what's left of his work. But beneath those reasons, something else pulses, a low, restless longing, as old and persistent as the river beneath the ice. The cabin is silent, save for the groan of the stove and the brittle crack of settling logs. Shadows gather in the corners. Walter pulls on his boots, shrugs into his coat, and steps outside. The world feels smaller in the half-light, trees pressing close, the air still, each sound magnified and strange. The snow crunches underfoot, and every breath plumes silver before vanishing. He follows the path he's worn through the drifts, each step a ritual, each footprint a quiet insistence. I'm still here. He moves slower than he used to, knees stiff, hip aching, but there's no rush. Not tonight. The river below murmurs beneath its frozen skin, the only voice for miles. As Walter approaches the bridge, his heart picks up, a mix of dread and anticipation. He stops at the edge, hands gripping the splintered railing, feeling the rough grain bite through his gloves. The broken span yawns before him, a wound carved by time and neglect. On the far side, the woods seem to lean closer, drawn by the promise of ruin. Then he sees it, the bobcat, barely more than a shadow, standing at the far edge of the broken planks. Its body is taut, every muscle coiled, but it doesn't flee. Instead, it meets his gaze, eyes steady, breath puffing in faint clouds. For a long moment, neither of them moves. The bridge becomes a line not just between banks, but between lives. Man and wild, regret and hope, memory and what remains. Walter speaks softly, voice rough with cold and unshed words. "You waiting for something?" His words tumble out, more to himself than to the animal. "Or someone?" The bobcat's ears twitch, but it doesn't retreat. It lowers itself to its haunches, tail flicking, gaze never wavering. Walter takes a careful step forward, boot creaking on the icy wood. The bridge groans beneath him, a warning, a memory. He pauses, senses the question hanging in the air. How much weight can one bridge, one heart, hold before it breaks? He glances down, sees his own boot prints overlaying those round, silent tracks from the night before. He studies the scratches again, fresh, raw, marking territory, or perhaps, he thinks, marking time. The bobcat's paws are tucked close, claws hidden, but its posture speaks of patience, of something unhurried and old. Walter feels the urge to reach across, to close the gap. But the span is too wide, the planks too rotten. So he stands instead, letting the quiet settle, letting the cold seep in. He finds himself talking, softly, haltingly, words drifting out across the darkness. "I keep coming out here," he admits. "Like if I stare at it long enough, something will make sense. Like maybe I'll figure out what I missed, what I should have done or said, or fixed." He laughs, but it's a brittle sound, quickly lost. "Funny, isn't it? A bridge man who can't cross his own bridge." The bobcat listens, or seems to. Its ears turn, head tilts, as if weighing the confession. In the animal's stillness, Walter feels the press of 1,000 unsaid things. Words meant for Daniel, apologies too heavy for any letter. The world shrinks to this: the chill of dusk, the ache of old wood, and a pair of golden eyes reflecting back all he cannot say. He wonders, not for the first time, what the bobcat seeks. Is it a lost mate, a vanished kit, or just the comfort of returning to the same broken place? Or maybe, like him, it's caught in a loop, a creature tethered to memory by a wound it cannot explain. He feels a kinship with the animal, sudden and fierce, as if their lonelinesses have braided together in the failing light. Each night, the bobcat returns to this spot, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Walter sees its tracks anew every morning, circling the bridge, pausing at the gap. He begins to look for the animal, to wait for it, a silent truce growing between them. On the coldest nights, he imagines the two of them, man and wildcat, keeping vigil at opposite ends, two souls bound by what they've lost. The weeks crawl by, dusk after dusk, and the ritual holds. Walter inches out onto the broken bridge, careful, never reckless. The bobcat backs away, but never disappears, always returning, always waiting. Some evenings, Walter whispers questions into the dark, about forgiveness, about healing, about whether anything broken can be made whole again. The answers never come, but he finds a strange comfort at the act of asking. And always, the river murmurs beneath, tireless, indifferent, carrying secrets beneath its frozen skin. The bridge creaks, the night deepens, and somewhere in the woods, an old hurt waits, as patient and sharp as a wildcat's gaze. If you've ever stood at the edge of something unfinished, unsure whether to go forward, to turn back, or simply to stay, you know the ache that finds a home here. You know how silence can stretch across years, and how sometimes the only witness to your waiting is something wild, something that refuses to leave you alone in the dusk. Tonight, as Walter lingers on the bridge, the bobcat's eyes catch the last of the light. For an instant, the whole world narrows to a single span, suspended between regret and hope. Then the darkness claims it, and Walter turns for home. Heart no lighter, but less alone. There's a box under Walter's bed, battered by decades of dust and neglect. Inside, the pages have yellowed, edges curled, ink blurred where old tears once fell. He never meant to keep them, not at first. Each letter was written in the raw hours before dawn, apologies scrawled in a shaking hand, questions no one could answer, fragments of what he wished he'd said to Daniel before the world split open. He tells himself sometimes that it's pointless. Dead men don't read letters, but on days when the ache tightens around his ribs, when the wind howls at the eaves and the world shrinks to a pinprick of cold and longing, Walter finds himself drawn back to the box, to the ritual of folding another sheet, signing his name at the end, hoping the words will carry somewhere beyond the silence. One morning, after a long night of watching the fog twist around the broken bridge, Walter makes a decision. He pulls on his thickest coat, slips a handful of letters into his pocket, and walks through the hush of new snow to the edge of the span. The air is brittle, so cold it stings his throat with every breath. He stands for a moment, listening, to the river beneath the ice, to the crackle of distant branches, to the memory of Daniel's voice, softer now, farther away with each passing year. He kneels and places the first letter at the foot of the bridge, weighed down with a smooth stone. The act is simple, almost childish, but he feels something shift inside, a pressure easing, a thread loosening in the web of regret. He adds a second, then a third, letting each page settle into the snow like a promise he's finally willing to keep. As he stands, he senses movement in the woods, silent, tentative. The bobcat emerges, its coat a ghostly shimmer against the trees, golden eyes sharp with winter hunger and something older. Walter's breath catches. The animal approaches the letters, circles them, nose twitching. It does not run. It does not bare its teeth. Instead, it sits, tail curled neatly around its paws, as if it too has come to pay its respects. For a long time, man and wildcat share the silence, broken only by the distant groan of shifting ice. Walter speaks, voice low and uncertain. "Do you listen?" he asks. "Or do you just bear witness?" The bobcat flicks its ears, but remains still. Walter feels the weight of his words press into the cold air, and for the first time, he's not ashamed to let them linger. Each day that follows, he brings another letter, leaving them at the bridge like breadcrumbs for ghosts. Some mornings, the pages are dusted with snow, the ink running in blue rivulets. Other days, he finds the bobcat already waiting, a silent sentinel by the pile. Once, when a gust scatters the topmost letter, the animal noses it back into place, careful, almost gentle. Walter's heart stumbles at the sight. How the wild, so often indifferent, can sometimes cradle what's fragile, even if it cannot heal it. In town, the world moves on. Cars groan to life, men swap stories over coffee, children trudge to the bus with scarves pulled high. But here, at the edge of the woods, time pools and slows, every hour marked not by clocks, but by the quiet ritual of letter and witness. Walter begins to speak aloud as he places each page, half to himself, half to the bobcat, as if voicing old wounds might keep them from festering deeper. He reads fragments from the letters, voice trembling but sure. "I'm sorry I missed your birthday that year. I thought work would wait, but it never does. I wish I'd asked more about your dreams, Daniel. Not just the ones that looked like mine. There are days I wake up and hear you laughing. I almost believe you're just in the next room. Sometimes the words run out, and he sits in silence, the bobcat blinking slow approval. Sometimes he finds tears freezing on his cheeks, and he doesn't bother to brush them away. The wildcat seems to understand. It stays close, never crossing the broken span, but never vanishing into the trees either. One evening, as the sky bruises to violet, Walter finds himself telling the bobcat a story from before, about the time he and Daniel built a toy raft together, how it snagged on a root and nearly sank, how they both laughed until their sides ached. The memory stings, but it warms too, a small fire against the cold. The bobcat watches, eyes bright, and for a moment, Walter pretends that the animal could be anyone. A son returned, a soul come home to listen. He thinks of how, in another life, he would have laughed at such a thing. An old man pouring his heart out to a wildcat at the end of the world. But grief rewrites the rules, teaches you to look for comfort wherever it can be found. Maybe, he thinks, we all need someone, anyone, to witness our pain, to hold it with us for a while, until it feels less sharp. The nights grow longer, the air colder, but Walter feels a shift, a thread of hope winding through the routine. He isn't healed. The bridge still yawns, broken and raw, and Daniel is still gone. But the letters grow heavier with honesty and lighter with each telling. The bobcat stays, sometimes near, sometimes distant, but always returning, always listening. If you've ever poured your heart into words that never found their way home, you know this ache. You know how a simple act, a letter, a confession, a hand extended, can feel like both surrender and salvation. You know what it's like to need a witness, even if that witness never speaks, even if all they do is sit beside you as the world turns to snow and night. On the coldest evening yet, Walter leaves the last letter at the bridge, watches the bobcat circle it, and feels something loosen in his chest, a knot he's carried for too long. He doesn't say goodbye. He simply stands, hands open to the cold, and lets the silence settle, thick and kind, around them both. Sometimes, late at night, Walter sits by the stove and lets his mind drift backward, not just to Daniel, but to the years before loss had a name. Memory has a way of coloring the past in softer light, of drawing out moments he once let pass unnoticed. The stories gather, pressed between the crackle of old logs and the hush of the winter wind, waiting for him to listen. One evening, after another quiet vigil at the broken bridge, Walter finds himself reaching for the photo album that hasn't left its shelf in years. The leather is cracked, the pages stiff, but the faces inside have not faded as much as he feared. There is Daniel at age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, arms flung wide atop the first bridge Walter ever built, a simple wooden footbridge over a lazy summer creek. His late wife, Marion, stands nearby, sunlight turning her hair to gold. That afternoon had been nothing special, just laughter and splashing, a picnic in the shade, but now it shines in memory with a clarity that aches. Walter traces his finger over the photograph, feeling the ghost of his wife's smile. The best bridges, he murmurs, aren't always crossed. Sometimes they just hold a memory. He wonders if Daniel understood that, or if Walter himself ever did, when the world was wide open and every new span seemed like a promise. The next morning, Walter returns to the bridge with a story on his lips instead of a letter. The bobcat is waiting, curled at the far side, tail flicking, gaze alert. Walter sits at the edge of the planks, snow seeping through his jeans, and begins to speak. Not just to the wildcat, but to the silent woods and the river beneath the ice. He tells the story of that first bridge, how it was nothing but pine boards and rope, how Daniel insisted on carrying the last plank, how Marion christened it with a crown of wildflowers. "I was so proud," Walter says, voice catching. "But I didn't know then how quickly pride can turn to fear. How every bridge you build, you worry will be the one that falls." The bobcat tilts its head, ears forward, as if catching the scent of old joy. Walter chuckles, the sound low and warm, surprised at himself. "You ever feel that, old friend?" he asks the animal. "The weight of what you can't fix?" He keeps talking. He remembers the bridge in Nebraska, how it gleamed in the dusk, how Marion said yes to his proposal at its highest arch. He tells the story of the rainstorm that nearly washed out the supports, how he and his crew worked through the night. Hands numb, boots caked in mud. "That bridge is still standing," he says softly. "Most days I wish I was there, holding it up myself." As the stories tumble out, Walter finds the bobcat drawing closer, emboldened by the quiet. It noses at the pile of letters, then nudges one free, pawing it across the snow before settling beside it. The animal's presence is a strange kind of comfort, a living witness to memories both sweet and bitter. Walter laughs, shaking his head. If only people believed this back in town. Walter Harris telling stories to a wildcat. But the act of telling, the simple naming of what was and what is, changes something in the air. The pain of memory softens at its edges. The old man and the bobcat sit in companionable silence, broken only by the crackle of ice beneath the bridge and the distant call of a jay. As the days pass, Walter makes a ritual of these visits. He brings stories along with his letters, spinning out the history of every bridge he's ever built. The wooden ones that creaked and groaned, the steel monsters that soared over highways, the little stone span in Vermont where Daniel once caught his first trout. Each memory carries its own ache, its own glimmer of hope. Sometimes, as the sky bruises toward evening, Walter finds himself speaking not just of bridges, but of failures, of the cracks he didn't see, the warnings he ignored, the quiet ways love can fray and unravel. He confesses to the bobcat and to the wide, listening world. "I spent so many years thinking if I built strong enough, no one could ever fall. But some things can't be engineered. Not loss, not forgiveness." On a day when the sun finally shines, melting the icicles from the eaves, Walter lingers by the bridge as the bobcat lies curled by his side. The animal's tail thumps lightly against the wood, a quiet heartbeat. Walter, emboldened, reaches out and lets his hand hover a breath from its fur. The bobcat doesn't flinch. It watches him, slow blinking, as if granting permission for the smallest act of trust. He closes his eyes, letting the warmth of that fragile truce seep in. "You know," he murmurs, "bridges aren't just for crossing. Sometimes they're the only way to hold on." He wonders if Daniel would understand this now, if Marion would smile to see her husband softened by time, open at last to the wild. As twilight settles, Walter carves a small token from a scrap of wood. Just an arch, nothing more. But he leaves it at the edge of the bridge, beside the bobcat and the scattered letters. A sign that stories can outlast even the deepest winter, that the telling itself can be a way of building something new. And if you've ever clung to a memory, held it close even as it stung, maybe you'll recognize the strange comfort Walter finds in these evenings. Maybe you know that sometimes the wildest hearts are the ones most willing to listen. Maybe you've learned, as he is learning now, that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means weaving pain and love together until they form a span strong enough to carry you forward. As darkness falls, Walter heads home, the bobcat pacing him at a respectful distance, the bridge behind them holding the weight of all that's been lost, and all that, somehow, still remains. It starts with a wind, thin at first, then thickening until it rattles the windows and sets the old stovepipe humming. The world outside Walter's cabin goes slate gray, the woods blurring into nothing. Snow arrives sideways, flung hard against the porch, then swirling, relentless, erasing his footprints almost as soon as they're made. Walter stands at the window, mug gripped tight in both hands, watching the storm settle in for the long haul. There's a particular silence that comes with blizzards in Minnesota, a kind of hush that swallows every sound, leaving only the distant groan of the wind and the brittle click of ice against glass. It's a silence that both soothes and unsettles, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to break. He's grown used to the isolation. Most winters, he can go days without seeing another soul, the roads out impassable, the phone line downed by heavy branches. But this storm feels different, meaner, heavier, as if it wants not just to trap him, but to bury the last scraps of warmth and memory beneath drifts that might never melt. By noon, visibility is gone. The bridge is lost in a haze of white, only the faintest outline of rail and shattered planks visible through the flurries. Walter paces the cabin, the small rooms shrinking with every turn. He thinks of the bobcat, how it's weathered so many storms, how its wild strength lets it slip between danger and safety, always finding shelter in some hollow or under a wind-fallen pine. He wonders if it's out there now, hunkered down, the snow curling over its back. Mid-afternoon, he tries to distract himself, sorting through old tools, making tea he doesn't want, scribbling lines in the margins of his notebook. But the silence keeps circling, prodding at old worries that won't stay buried. He remembers a blizzard years ago, Daniel's red mittens lost in the drift, the frantic relief when they found him giggling beneath a fir tree, cheeks flushed, alive and unafraid. Memory aches in a way that's almost physical. Night comes early. The storm shows no sign of letting up. Walter eats in silence, the crackle of the fire and the howl of wind outside the only company he has. He tries not to think of the bobcat. He tries not to wonder if a wild animal can miss a friend, or if it simply hunkers down and waits for the world to right itself. Sometime after midnight, the wind shifts, rattling the eaves. Walter wakes with a start, cold sweat at the nape of his neck. Something feels off, a pressure in the air, a tightness in his chest he can't explain. He listens, heart pounding, but hears only the steady hush of falling snow. Morning brings a stillness that's almost reverent. The storm has passed, leaving the world outside transformed, every surface heavy with white, every tree draped in silence. The sky is low and bright, unblemished except for the pale blue promise of distant sun. Walter pulls on his boots and parka, bracing against the cold that seeps through every seam. The snow is knee-deep, clean as a shroud. He pushes his way toward the bridge, each step a struggle, lungs burning, legs trembling. The quiet is so complete it feels holy. He nearly misses it at first. A dark stain on the snow near the far end of the bridge. He stands still, heart thumping, then moves closer, each crunch of his boots impossibly loud. Blood. A splash of it stark against the drifts, the marks trailing off toward the woods. Walter kneels, fingers numb, pressing into the red-smeared ice. The shape of a paw print is there, bigger than a house cat's, Heavy, the snow around it churned with the struggle of something wounded. Fear claws at him. Sharp, familiar. It's the same fear that seized him when the news came about Daniel's bridge. The same helpless panic that lives in the space between heartbeat and breath. But now it's different. Now it's for the wild thing that's shared his silences. The animal that's watched and waited and listened. He calls out, voice cracking, the name he's never dared speak aloud. "Hey, where are you?" It's foolish. The woods swallow his shout, but he doesn't stop. He circles the bridge, searching for any sign. A tuft of fur, another print, the shadow of movement in the trees. Nothing. Only the hush, heavy and patient. He stands there a long time, snow creeping up his boots, the cold needling into his bones. He thinks of the bobcat limping away, blood trailing, alone against the storm. He thinks of all the times he's been too late. Too late to check the bolts. Too late to say sorry. Too late to save what mattered. A gust of wind lifts the edge of a letter from the pile he's left at the bridge. Walter stoops, pressing it back down, hands shaking. The sight of his own handwriting, so desperate, so unfinished, cuts deeper than he expects. He stares at the bridge, the ruin, the scar on the land and in himself, and feels the weight of all his failures. If you've ever lost something in the whiteout, if you've ever searched for a shape in the storm and found only silence, you know this ache. You know how the world can seem to conspire to erase the things you love, to leave you shouting into the void for a reply that never comes. He waits until his legs go numb, until the wind finds its voice again and urges him home. But the worry gnaws at him, sharp and relentless. He can't shake the image of golden eyes dulled with pain, of a wild body curled tight beneath some fallen branch, shivering, alone. That night, as darkness falls and the cold deepens, Walter sits at the window, face pressed to the glass, searching for any sign of movement. He promises himself, if there's a chance, any chance at all, he won't let the bobcat die alone. Not this time. Not if there's anything left in him to offer. The storm may have passed, but the ache remains, a new kind of urgency threading through the quiet, a longing that tastes of hope and dread in equal measure. Out there, somewhere, a wounded thing is waiting. And for the first time in years, Walter finds himself praying for dawn. Dawn rises pale and uncertain, a thin seam of gold struggling against the hush of snow and the long shadow of the storm. Walter doesn't sleep. He sits by the stove, wrapped in his old army blanket, watching the blue light seep slowly across the floor. Every so often, he glances at the clock, but the hands seem to drag, as if time itself is reluctant to move forward. In the quiet, his thoughts circle the same wound, the blood by the bridge, the bobcat missing, the ache of powerlessness blooming again inside him. He moves stiffly, the cold gnawing at old joints as he layers on flannel, sweater, parka. There is a tremor in his hands he can't disguise, not just from age or weather, but from dread, from hope. For a moment he stands in the entryway, boots heavy on the mat, remembering every time he was too slow, too late, every time he hesitated and loss walked right past him. He opens the door. The cold rushes in, sharp as a rebuke, but he doesn't flinch. He steps out, each movement deliberate. The snow is deeper than yesterday, the drifts nearly to his thighs, but he forces his way through, using a shovel for balance, leaning into the pain of every step. The woods are silent, wrapped in the aftermath of the storm. No birds, no wind, no sound, but his own breath rasping in the air. Walter crosses the yard, follows the tracks left by the wounded bobcat. Marks churned in the snow, now stiff with a rime of ice, the red of blood faded to brown. He calls softly, not really expecting an answer. The woods offer only silence, but still he pushes forward, fear and longing guiding his path. He finds the bobcat beneath a fallen spruce, barely more than a shadow curled tight against the cold. Its fur is dusted with snow, breath shallow, sides rising and falling in a slow, uneven rhythm. There is blood on the animal's leg, matted and frozen, and a thin whine escapes as Walter kneels nearby. Their eyes meet, wild gold to weary gray, and for a moment, neither of them moves. Walter speaks in a voice so quiet it barely disturbs the air. "Hey now. Easy, I'm here." His own words sound foreign, fragile, but he keeps talking. He inches forward, heart beating so loud he's sure the animal can hear it. "I can't fix everything, but I can hold on to this. I can try." He sheds his gloves, hands trembling as he works his scarf free and presses it gently to the wound. The bobcat shivers, muscles twitching, but does not bolt. Walter murmurs, steady and low, the way he used to when Daniel woke from bad dreams. "You're not alone. Not now." The words surprise him. He means them for the animal, but maybe more for himself. Lifting the bobcat is an act of faith and pain. The animal is heavier than it looks, limp but not unconscious, claws flexing weakly. Walter cradles it against his chest, coat and flannel soaked with melted snow, and stands, legs shaking with effort. He turns for home, moving slowly, each step a promise. "I won't let go. Not this time." Back inside the cabin, warmth blooms in slow circles as Walter lays the bobcat on a nest of blankets by the stove. He works quickly, old field training kicking in, cutting away the blood-matted fur, cleaning the wound, binding it as best he can. The bobcat growls, a warning in its throat, but doesn't strike. Its eyes follow him, wary but not afraid. Walter finds comfort in that trust, as tentative as it is. He talks as he works, not because the animal understands, but because the words matter. "I've lost too much," he admits, voice unsteady. "Bridges, family, chances. I never said what I should have, never fixed what needed fixing." He finds himself confessing things he's never told a soul. The day Daniel left for college, the way pride twisted love until it snapped, the long years of silence that followed. The bobcat listens, breath slowing, eyes blinking with the weight of pain and exhaustion. Hours pass. Walter stays by the stove, watching the animal sleep, listening to its breath. Sometimes he speaks, sometimes he's quiet, but always he stays. He thinks of all the nights he spent waiting for Daniel to call, all the times he wished for a sign that forgiveness was possible. Now he watches the slow rise and fall of the bobcat's chest and realizes healing isn't a grand gesture. Sometimes it's simply holding on, refusing to turn away when the wild or wounded come to your door. Outside, the sun climbs higher, throwing gold across the snow. Walter dozes in the chair, dreams flickering behind his eyes. Daniel, a boy again, laughing beside a river. Marion humming in the kitchen. A bridge rebuilt, stronger than before. He wakes to the sound of the bobcat stirring, stretching tentatively, eyes searching the room with new clarity. Walter smiles, the gesture unfamiliar but real. He pours a saucer of water, places it near the animal, and sits close but not too close. "We made it," he says softly, unsure if he means the night, the storm, or something much larger. For the first time in a long while, hope feels like something you can reach out and touch, as fragile as a heartbeat. as real as the wild thing at his feet. If you've ever cradled something broken, an animal, a memory, your own heart, you know this moment. You know the fear of failing again, the stubbornness of trying anyway. You know that sometimes to hold on is all we're given. Sometimes it's enough. As evening falls, the fire burns steady, the bobcat breathes easier, and Walter sits in the quiet, speaking his regrets and hopes aloud. He does not ask for forgiveness, only the chance to make right what little he can, here, now. The bridge outside remains unfinished, but inside the cabin, a different kind of mending has begun. The days after the storm arrive one after another, each lighter, a little warmer, the sun spending longer on the old cabin's windowsill. The woods begin to thaw, drop by careful drop, as if the whole world is learning how to loosen its grip. Walter feels it too, in his hands, in his chest, a gentling, a softening he never expected. The bobcat recovers slowly. Each day it grows steadier, less wary. Sometimes Walter wakes to find it curled in a patch of sun near the stove, tail twitching in dreams, the wild edge of its spirit undimmed by the wound. There is distance between them, a respectful hush, but also a quiet understanding. Walter keeps his voice low, his movements gentle, and the animal allows him this nearness. But something else stirs as the bobcat heals. A restless need to finish what he started, to put his hands to use, to prove that not everything broken must stay that way. The bridge outside still waits, spanning the creek in a splintered line of sorrow, each plank a memory Walter has carried for far too long. He stands at the window, eyes tracing the ruin, and feels the ache of it like a pulse. One morning, with the air bright and full of birdsong, Walter gathers his old tools, the hammer with its worn grip, the box of nails, the battered saw with the edge that always drags on knotted pine. He stands at the head of the bridge, boots planted firm, and lets the weight of the moment settle over him. This time, he tells himself, the work isn't for the past, not for his reputation, not for the world's approval, not even for Daniel's memory. This time, he's building for the sake of mending, for the act itself, for forgiveness, perhaps, if only from himself. The first boards are the hardest. His hands tremble as he measures and cuts, the wood splitting with protest in the cold. But he works slowly, methodically, humming Marion's favorite tune under his breath. Each plank he fits in place is a conversation he never had, a moment of tenderness he thought he'd lost. Sometimes, as he works, he feels Daniel at his shoulder, hears his wife's laughter threading through the trees. The ache sharpens, but it's cleaner now, less like a wound, more like a reminder. The bobcat watches from the riverbank, eyes unblinking. It sits with regal patience, sometimes stretching, sometimes prowling the edge, but always returning to the same spot as if overseeing the project. Walter speaks to it as he works, telling stories, sharing small victories. That's the last of the rotten beams, old friend. Even muttering curses when a stubborn nail refuses to set. The animal listens in its silent, wild way, and Walter finds comfort in the ritual, the sense of being accompanied, even if only by a creature that owes him nothing. Neighbors in town might laugh to see him, an old man bent over splintered wood, muttering to a wildcat as if it were a foreman on the job. But out here, pride doesn't matter. Only the work, only the making, only the strange alchemy that turns grief to purpose and regret to resolve. As the days lengthen, the bridge takes shape, a little at a time, plank by plank, each nail hammered in with care. Walter doesn't rush. He works until the light fades, then returns each morning, sometimes with a thermos of coffee, sometimes with an extra blanket for the bobcat. It becomes their ritual, man and wildcat, side by side, the silence between them rich with meaning. One evening, as the sun burns low and gold across the creek, Walter hammers the final plank into place. He stands back, breathless, sweat and sawdust on his brow, heart pounding with something too complicated for joy. He runs his hand along the new span, testing each board, feeling the give and hold of the wood. It's not perfect. No bridge ever is, but it's enough. It holds. At the center of the bridge, Walter mounts a small wooden plaque, carved with trembling hands. For Daniel, the bridge that should have held. He reads the words aloud, voice wavering, the sound carrying over the water and into the trees. The bobcat stands nearby, silent witness to the dedication, tail sweeping the dirt, eyes catching the last of the light. Walter lingers on the bridge, looking out at the river, at the place where the ice is finally breaking apart, where water moves free beneath the thaw. He closes his eyes, lets the hush settle around him. Not every bridge is meant for crossing, he thinks. Some exist only to remind us that we're capable of mending, that in the act of building, we begin to heal. That night, as darkness draws in, Walter lights a fire and sits with the bobcat in the glow. He reads a final letter to Daniel, the words heavy and soft. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know this bridge is real, even if no one ever crosses it. The bobcat blinks, slow and deliberate, and for a heartbeat, Walter feels as if something inside him has eased, a knot uncoiling, a grief less sharp. If you've ever tried to build something out of sorrow, if you've ever turned regret into action, however small, you know this feeling. You know how the making can matter more than the thing made, how the act of trying is its own kind of peace. By the time the fire burns low, Walter is tired but not hollow. He looks out at the bridge, at the wildcat curled close, and knows that he's done what he could. Tomorrow, the world will move on. But tonight, he's built a place for memory, for forgiveness, for the wild things that help us finish what's broken inside. The river, once sealed tight by winter, runs clear now, a restless ribbon, tugging free from the ice. Spring comes slow in Minnesota, uncertain in its mercy, but it comes all the same. The snow withdraws in patches, revealing last year's leaves, broken twigs, the old scars of a world waiting for new life. Walter wakes early, long before sunlight threads through the window. There's a heaviness in his chest, a mixture of hope and ache that never quite fades, no matter how bright the day. He moves quietly through the house, careful not to disturb the bobcat sleeping by the stove, its flanks rising and falling with the deep, even breaths of hard-won rest. He pours coffee, the familiar ritual grounding him. Today feels different. There is a kind of stillness outside, a hush not born of winter but of waiting. Walter drinks his coffee slow, gaze lingering on the new bridge outside the window. It glows golden in the morning light, solid and sure, something remade, not for traffic or commerce or pride, but for memory, for forgiveness, for letting go. The bobcat wakes, stretching in the warmth, tongue curling over teeth as it yawns. Its wound is nearly healed, a pale scar now beneath the fresh fur. There's a wildness in its eyes, a flicker of the deep woods, an old restlessness that no comfort or kindness can quite erase. Walter kneels, one hand resting on the edge of the blanket, and the animal blinks at him, slow and thoughtful. "I guess it's almost time, huh?" he says, voice barely more than a whisper. The bobcat blinks again, golden eyes bright, unreadable. Walter knows what's coming. Some bonds, no matter how fierce, how necessary, are made to loosen, to release. He thinks of Daniel, of all the things he clung to for too long, of the bridges he tried to hold together with guilt and silence. Letting go isn't forgetting. It's just finally trusting that what you built will hold, even if no one else ever crosses it. The sun rises higher, sending shafts of light across the kitchen floor. Walter opens the door. The bobcat pauses, eyes darting from man to doorway, nostrils flaring at the scent of thaw and pine and 1,000 stories on the breeze. For a moment, it hesitates. A single heartbeat, 2 souls lingering in the warm silence, then steps outside. They walk together, Walter slow, the bobcat silent at his side. Each footstep is a goodbye, though neither of them say it. The air is fresh, washed clean by meltwater and hope. The new bridge stands bright against the river, its planks still marked by the work of sorrow and resolve. At the foot of the bridge, Walter kneels. He pulls a final letter from his jacket, the paper creased and soft from weeks of handling. His hands don't shake anymore. He reads aloud, voice steady, the words rippling out over the water. Daniel, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know this bridge is real, even if no one ever crosses it. I built it not to erase what happened, but to say I was here, that I loved and lost and tried to make something better from the pieces left behind. Maybe that's all any of us can do. He sets the letter down at the edge of the bridge, weighted with a small stone. The bobcat sniffs the page, then sits beside it, a silent, wild witness to everything unsaid. They linger there, man and animal, for a long while. The river babbles beneath, the sun climbing, the world trembling on the edge of green. Finally, the bobcat stands, stretches, and walks across the new bridge, each step careful, deliberate, as if blessing the span with its weight. Walter watches, breath caught in his chest, as the animal reaches the far side, pauses, and glances back one last time. Then it slips into the brush, melting into the woods. The only trace its paw prints pressed deep into the damp boards, tracks leading not back, but onward into the wild. Walter stays a while, watching the empty span, the river, the trembling shadows of leaves returning. He lets the quiet settle around him, lets the ache of goodbye breathe through the bones of the bridge. There's a kind of peace here, not perfect, not whole, but honest. The world doesn't need to know what was mended. The world just needs to keep moving, river to ocean, grief to memory, winter to spring. He rises at last, joints stiff, heart lighter. At the house, the stove is still warm, the coffee pot half full. He sits at the window, watching the sun climb higher, watching the wild claim its own. If you've ever rebuilt a part of yourself, or found comfort in unlikely company, I hope you'll share your story, or pass this along to someone who needs it. The most important bridges aren't always for travel. They're for making peace. Sometimes, all we can do is build, forgive, and let the wild carry our story farther than we ever could. So the story ends, not with a grand crossing, but with tracks to the wild, a bridge that holds not weight, but meaning, and the quiet, stubborn hope that every ending is just the beginning of another way home.